all the PC users are shaking their heads, but you're all wrong, respectfully. Thank you everyone for coming this morning. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the program, introduce our honored guests, and I'm going to spotlight you, Scott.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi. So welcome everybody. And thank you so much, David, for getting up early on a Sunday morning to join us and talk about an issue that's very important, obviously, to you and to me. Issues that arise when having a family member with a disability. David, as many of you know, was the senior strategist for Barack Obama's presidential campaigns, and is currently the director of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago and host of the Axe Files podcast on CNN. Most important, David and his wife, Susan, are parents of a beautiful daughter, Lauren, who has an intellectual disability and who, like Liz and my daughter, Sarah, lives at Misericordia on the north side of Chicago. As many of you know, David published a very powerful op-ed in the New York Times over the 4th of July weekend about Lauren and about his family's experiences with the disability system. And we're very honored to have David talk to us this morning about his experiences and how we've been trying to get some changes in DC. So, David, if we could start, it's been a while, obviously, since that op-ed was published over the 4th of July weekend, and maybe it'd be a good place to start to just have you sort of, again, summarize the points that you were making in that article.
Sure, Scott. First of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm particularly happy to be here with you because we spent so many hours talking about this over the last 6 months, and I feel blessed to have had your wise counsel throughout and your collaboration throughout that process. Yeah, I wrote the piece because I knew that there was a bill working its way through Congress to vastly expand federal funding for essentially for group homes around the country and for home care, and both of which were vitally necessary and which I supported. But the net effect of it relative to places like Misericordia that were larger in size would be to set up a funding disparity. And as we talked about it, that funding disparity really threatened Misericordia and other larger programs because of staffing. There's a huge competition going on for staffing right now, a critical shortage in all facilities, large and small. And if you give significant funding to just group homes, the net effect would be to turn a crisis into a catastrophe. And I felt like for places like Misericordia, and Misericordia has been really a life-transforming experience for Lauren and for Susan and our family. Our daughter was born with 7 months after she was born, she started having seizures. We found her blue and limp in her crib. They told us when we rushed her to the hospital that this would be a kind of transient event. It sadly was not. These were the first of thousands of seizures that she would have in her childhood. They had tremendous developmental impacts on her. They also consigned her to a life of hospitalizations and multiple medications that affected her behavior and also loneliness, because her developmental track, and some of you can appreciate this, was different than the other kids in school. We tried to put her in inclusion programs. We wanted her to be with kids who did not have similar disabilities. And as it turns out, their emotional growth was on a different pace than hers, and she felt more and more isolated. And, we were left to try and find programs for her where she could find peers to socialize with, and that's where she gravitated. But once she graduated from high school, we just couldn't satisfy her needs. And then Misericordia came into her life, and it's been miraculous for her. I mean, her days are full. She's got more friendships than you can imagine. There are probably hundreds of friends of hers whose birthdays she can recite to you from memory, and who, her life has been transformed, and ours as well. So I was moved to try and explain why this could not move forward as it was written, and the devastating effect of it. Now, there's a sidebar to this, and I'm sorry for this desultory presentation, but there's a sidebar to this, which is there is a long history in this country of institutionalization of people with developmental disabilities, and it's an ugly history of people, mostly in state-run institutions, being shunted off, warehoused, and forgotten. And an activist movement grew up to oppose that, and I absolutely am grateful for that movement, because it was humane and it was just. And there still are some badly run state-run institutions around this country, and there is still a legacy of that. But what has evolved is a kind of one-size-fits-all philosophy that every person with disabilities should either live at home or live in group homes in the community. And that's not the right answer for everyone. It's not the right answer for Scott's daughter, Sarah. It's not the right answer who has severe disabilities, and most of you know her. It's not the right answer for Lauren, who needs that socialization that she gets at Misericordia. And it's not, on the face of it, fair and just to say, if you have disabilities, we are going to tell you exactly how to live. We don't say that to people who don't have disabilities. We don't tell the elderly you can only live in a group home, or you can't live in a assisted living community. We don't do that, and we shouldn't do that here, and we shouldn't do it certainly through a back door, which is what this legislation would do. And there were people, most of the people who were behind it were intending to solve a huge problem. 800,000 people on a waiting list trying to get into group homes around the country, a need for more home health care as we get older. But some saw an ancillary benefit that this could accelerate the move completely from intermediate care facilities and larger facilities to group homes. So I wrote the piece, Scott. It's a long-winded way of telling you. I wrote the piece because I wanted my voice to be heard, and I wanted people to understand why there needed to be this choice, and that if they move forward with this legislation, it should account for that in some way, and not be the instrument through which intermediate care facilities in any communities of size, regardless of their quality, would be disadvantaged and perhaps shuttered. And I really wanted people to hear my story, and I wanted to try and influence the debate.
Thank you, David. That was a great explanation. And just sort of to fill in a little bit. And by the way, folks, we're going to reserve some time at the end to answer questions that you may have. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then we'll ask David those questions at the end. Just to sort of fill some information in here, Medicaid funds residential settings for folks with disabilities who need residential care. like my daughter does and like David's does. And they're basically, to simplify it, two branches of funding. There's a branch of Medicaid funding that funds what are called intermediate care facilities, which are like the facilities like Misericordia. They tend to be a bit larger. They tend to be more congregate care, although not always. And then there's a separate stream of funding, Medicaid funding for the smaller group homes that David mentioned. And the legislation that David is talking about was going to increase the federal funding only for the group homes and not for the intermediate care facilities. And there are 65,000 men and women across the country living in intermediate care facilities. And we just thought it was unfair and inappropriate to only increase funding for one set of folks with disabilities and not the other set. And you're going to hear a lot of talk today about Misericordia because that's where Sarah lives and that's where Lauren lives. This is not meant to be an advertisement for Misericordia, although obviously it provides great care. But it's what David and I know best. But as I said, there are 65,000 men and women across the country living in Misericordia-like settings that need the same support as folks living in group homes. And David, one of the myths that I guess has persisted is that folks that live in these intermediate care facilities are isolated and segregated and warehoused, et cetera. And so I think it's important for folks to hear what life is really like for Lauren at Misericordia. Maybe you could provide a little bit more about sort of her daily life so that people understand that it really is a myth.
Yeah, I can, because she calls and reports on all her activities every day, and with enthusiasm. Just to echo one point of yours, as we were working on this issue, Scott is also deeply involved in an organization called Together for Choice. It represents intermediate care facilities across the country. It's a group that was formed to try and tell our story. And many of these programs are very successful in just the way that Misericordia is. So Lauren, she lives in an apartment on the campus of Misericordia, which some of you may be familiar with, is on 6300 North Ridge. It's a very lovely campus. It's been built up and improved and added onto over the years. She lives in something called the Shannon Apartments. She lives with she has an apartment with two other women, but it's a dorm-like setting. So, she'll go down in the morning and have coffee with her friends. Sometimes she'll call us and you can hear the bustle in the background of laughter, and everybody's having fun before they go off to, now, obviously the virus has been an issue, and they've been very cautious and done a great job of protecting our loved ones from the virus. They've had very little incident, even though they have this group setting, because of the precautions that they've taken. But in a normal time, Lauren would go off to work, and we'll talk about a little bit later. There are all kinds of work assignments that they take on, sometimes from outside, assigned to Misericordia, and the residents work on those, but also, art class and ceramics, and or she might go to the greenhouse. They're opening, this is an advertisement, they're opening a coffee and bakery place on Ridge, which should be open sometime this year. I think it's close. I don't know. You may have more information on that, Scott, than I, but some of the residents work there. Lauren goes to the fitness center every day. She There's a bowling alley in her building. She's a great bowler, something she and I have been working on since she was a kid. She loves to bowl. She's in a choir. And her days are quite are filled, you know. Yesterday, they had a big dance at Shannon Apartments. And more than anything else, she has really close friendships. When she's home, she's, you know, texting with her friends and talking to her friends on the phone. This is a life we never thought she would have. She also has more independence. She and some of her friends can walk to the Target. They go to, Subway and restaurants nearby. And I mean, if you had told me 20 years ago, and I think her anniversary is coming up in 2 weeks of 20 years of living at Misericordia. If you had told me 20 years ago, this was what her life was going to be, I would have thought it impossible. And so Misericordia really has had a huge impact. And I think I speak for all the parents there and all the siblings there when I say that. And, my only regret is Misericordia itself has waiting lists, and there should be more of these options for people. They should not be told that there's only one way to live. And by the way, Misericordia has a range of housing. So Misericordia itself runs some group homes in the community. This underscores the sort of unfairness and kind of perversion is the wrong word, but unfairness of the policy if it were to go forward as it was written. Misericordia will get some support for their staffing in the group homes, but not for the same for people who are doing the same work on the campus. And that doesn't make sense because they're doing the same kind of work. The last thing I'd say is the staff itself is extraordinary. They're well trained and they're incredibly dedicated and committed. And my daughter has such affection for them because they have such affection for her. And we never for a second doubt that she's getting the kind of supervision and care that she needs. There's a nurse who staffs that building who she worships. And, so it's been an extraordinary, it's been redemptive. We thought her life was destined for something much different than this. And we're just really, really grateful.
Thank you, David. And again, on the staff issue, as David said, the staff is extraordinary, but they get paid essentially a minimum wage for a job that's extremely difficult. And folks could earn the same or more working at McDonald's or working at an Amazon warehouse, which is not nearly as difficult a job. And so one of the things we've been advocating for is increased funding so that wages for these workers can be increased, which should reduce the turnover, which in many places is as high as 50%. And so for Sarah, for example, there's a revolving door of staff that take care of her. And that's very, very difficult on Sarah and folks like her, for whom routine and getting to know folks and getting used to folks is so very important. David, obviously you have a lot of friends on Capitol Hill that saw your article. Can you sort of describe the reaction to your beautiful and powerful op-ed?
Thank you. It's been interesting. I do have a lot of friends, and one of the reasons I wrote the piece was I wanted my friends to read it because these are good people, and I think they're trying to do the right thing. They're caring, and the initiative, what was then called the Better Jobs, Better Care Act, or Better Care, Better Jobs Act, was very much aimed at providing care for people who need it. But I think there was a big blind spot on this issue. And I was surprised at the amount of incoming I got from members of Congress who really didn't know about this issue. And then some who did, who were really quite supportive. Adam Schiff was an example of that. I did send the piece to friends in the White House. I had good conversations with them, but it's been a tremendously difficult thing to move. You know, this was all incorporated into the Build Back Better Act, and that became such a fraught process that, you know, and they were trying to balance so many pieces that it was really difficult to get sort of wedge into this debate. I don't want to jump ahead in your narrative, Scott, but while there was a great deal of compassion, and you know, I spoke to the speaker and others about this, Senator Schumer's staff, and we were able to get wedge our way into this, and we did get a recognition that intermediate care facilities needed to be accounted for in this bill. You know, we were disappointed by the amount that was committed to it. It would have created a huge disparity, and still, but it was important that there was the recognition was important, the precedent was important, the statement that ICFs are not to be dismissed, that ICFs have a place, was important. And so, you know, I felt, to the degree that my piece started that conversation, it was well worthwhile.
And just again, for folks, we try to avoid using initials because they're hard to follow, but ICF is Intermediate Care Facilities, which is the kind of facility that Misericordia operates on its campus and that are operated throughout the country by other organizations. You know, obviously, we're all sort of interested in how Washington works and how you can influence policy. And, you know, it was eye-opening for me that even with your help and all your contacts, we didn't make as much progress as we'd like. What could you tell us about how we can affect change in Washington and in our state capitals and on issues that are really of importance to us?
Well, I'm happy that you asked if I could explain how Washington works. Often when I'm out speaking, I get the question as to whether if Washington works. But you know, look, there was a tremendous amount. We had tremendous amount of organized opposition to any changes in this. Some coming from groups that, frankly, really would like to eliminate intermediate care facilities and make the only option group homes. Some of it from, you know, the Service Employee Union represents home healthcare workers and workers in these group homes. They're very powerful. They were very much an impetus behind this bill, because it'll mean hiring of a lot more workers. We had some support on our side, but not nearly what was on their side. And then there is this prevailing view that, you know, I have had conversations with legislators who are just so dogmatic about the history of larger facilities and programs that they're just implacable. They don't want this, you know, they feel that they're evil, notwithstanding everything that I told them. And, you know, what I would hear is, well, Misericordia is an exception. Well, Misericordia is exceptional, but it's not necessarily an exception in the sense that there are other good programs all across the country who we were allied with. Here's what I know. I do know, Scott, when you mobilized the list I'm dating myself, I say the mailing list, the email list from Together for Choice, and trained it on various members of Congress. They knew, they felt it, they heard it. It did get their attention. And I think it had something to do with why we got something in the bill. I think without those efforts, I'm not sure we would. And that was very, I mean, it didn't surprise me given what I know. I mean, politicians are sensitive to feedback from constituents. And so, you know, lesson number one is organize, and make sure that you're deploying the voices at your disposal. There's such a large, you know, we have our own community of people who live in these larger facilities, but on other issues, there's a larger disability community. To be really frank with you, one of the things that used to drive me crazy and still irritates me is that if you could organize the disability community, people who have loved ones with disabilities, as a political force, it would be, you know, it would be as powerful as any, because this is something that crosses every political line, every demographic line, every regional line. And, you know, the problem is that we find ourselves constantly in a battle for inadequate funding and scraps. And so instead of working together, often the disabilities community is working, you know, against itself, and it makes us less efficient. But I do think organizing and making people, making them aware. I mean, this isn't a secret, and it's not going to be a revelation to anybody on this Zoom, but politicians like their jobs and want to be reelected. And when people say, this is a voting issue for me, this is a life and death issue for me. And I don't want to take away from the fact that they also, I mean, I think while they're there, they want to do things that are meaningful. But make your voices heard is the first and most important lesson. And then, you know, in our own conversations, I think, Scott, the most effective thing that we did was to make people understand that when they move from theory to implementation, that there are real life ramifications of what they do. I don't think anybody was really focused on what that if you plus up funding for group homes, that you may create a staffing catastrophe for ICFs like Misericordia, because of the competition for these direct care workers. I don't think anybody was really focused on that before we started telling them. So make sure that people are aware of what the real issues are, because sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions and they just don't know.
So, you know, the Build Back Better Act, which was going to increase the funding for the group homes, and we got a little bit in there for the ICFs as well. It passed the House. It's over in the Senate, but the Democrats are not united in the Senate. Need all 50 to get it passed. So where do you think that bill stands at this point? And in particular, where do things stand for the funding that was in that bill to help folks with disabilities?
Yeah, well, I think where it stands is no one knows. The White House seems confident that they can reconstitute something. And what's obvious is, because they need 50 votes, that something has to pass muster with Senator Manchin in particular, also Senator Sinema from here in Arizona. But Manchin is key. And honestly, I'm a little, I don't know why they didn't just get his bottom line. I mean, I think what you hear is that he wouldn't give his bottom line, but, you know, whatever passes will be his, with his assent and probably input. One of the rules, Scott, that he has laid down is he doesn't want any program in there that isn't permanently accounted for. He's very debt sensitive, and he felt like, and he was right, that there were a lot of initiatives in the bill that were not permanently funded, and therefore the idea that it fit under the cap that he had set was illusory, because he knew that they would have to come back and ask for more money to keep the program going. And once it was going, people weren't going to want to stop it. That is not what that does not apply here, because this Medicaid funding, the 6% Medicaid boost that you spoke of for smaller settings, for group homes, would pass the Manchin test. So I think we, if anything moves forward, I suspect some version of this will be in it. I've been assured by some of the friends that you and I've been talking to that, our piece will be in it. But again, it's not adequate. It is important, but it's not adequate. And, we'll see. So I would say there's still a chance. I don't want to get deep in the weeds here, but Senator Lujan from New Mexico had a stroke the other day, and he's not going to be back for 6 weeks. That may reduce the chance of getting something done, because they have limited amount of time to get a lot of things done in the Senate. But I think personally that the odds still favor that they'll get something done before now and the end of the year. And what's in it is TBD, but this is certainly a candidate because it is funded permanently.
And even beyond this particular bill, obviously funding for disability services is a huge issue. And as you've already said, it's just, there's been inadequate funding in this area for years. How should one proceed at this point to try to get the funding needed to address the staffing crisis and the waiting lists and all that desperately needs to be done?
I think that, Scott, that if this bill doesn't move forward, that there'll be other efforts to boost it. I think there, again, we have to, in a perfect world, we would settle the intramural debates within the disability community and make funding for people with disabilities a priority that we're fighting for jointly. Because, what happens is you get to the end of the debate in a legislative body, and the loudest and most powerful voices are the ones that are accommodated. And the disabilities community, despite its potential, does not speak as loudly as it should. So, I think that increasing bottom line funding, but also increasing it in a way that lifts all of the various needs and programs associated with disabilities are lifted at once is essential. And I look, you asked me earlier what you could do, what we can do. I think, and certainly in this, I'm talking to a congregation here, and I know you guys have a great social justice history. But, we are taught that we should pay particular attention to the most vulnerable. And so we ought to hold our public officials accountable for that. That's a value that we ought to insist on. And, I'd like to see the community better organized to demand that. And people of good faith who understand the need, even if they don't have someone with disabilities in their family, I'd like to mobilize that force.
Before we turn to questions, David, I just wanted to have a minute here to address the employment issue that you alluded to earlier. it is very difficult, as we know, for folks with disabilities, especially those with intellectual disabilities, to get employment at the normal type of job. We do see when we go to the grocery store, sometimes folks bagging groceries and doing other such things. And these tend to be sort of the higher functioning folks with intellectual disabilities. They're not folks like my daughter, Sarah, for example. And there is a provision in labor law that allows what's called a commensurate wage to be paid for individuals with disabilities if, after rigorous testing, it can be shown that they're less productive than the non-disabled person performing the same job. And as you mentioned, that's a highly controversial issue right now. And I'd be interested in your view, based on Lauren's experiences, as to the utility of maintaining that special wage for folks with disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that, I mean, again, I said earlier, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There is some reason for people to explore this issue, because there is an opportunity for businesses to exploit it, and that is the concern, that you get your work done and you pay less for the work, and so I understand that. I mean, for Lauren, the work experience honestly isn't about. She works at Loyola University. She works in a crew of people from Misericordia who go and they clean classrooms and so on. I don't think I think she likes getting a paycheck. She likes the idea of it, but that's not it's the experience of work and what she learns from being at work. And that is true as well in the workshop programs that they have at Misericordia. I don't, and there are a lot of people at Misericordia who benefit from these programs who would not be hired. The premise is that they would be hired regardless of their disability and paid commensurately with others. That's not the reality. So the reality is that if you eliminate this provision for not-for-profits like Misericordia, you're probably taking away for my daughter, your daughter, other people, the experience of work. And that would be a tragic thing. So this is another area where I think people are well-intended. I also think there are probably interests that are labor that pushing it for their own purposes, but there needs to be nuance, there needs to be exception, and that exception needs to be recognized. So, and I have to say, what's been eye-opening for me is that it's my own political tribe that has been most aggressive about this, because they feel like they are promoting, human rights by doing it, but without nuance, they are enhancing some people's rights and they are diminishing other people's rights. And that's the case that we're going to continue to make.
It seems to me, David, another example of a one size does not fit all. It's appropriate for some, but it would harm others. And there's just no reason to do that. There's ways of addressing this issue without doing that.
And Scott, you have presented me with studies and statistics from states where this kind of change has been made, and the sort of helpful effect that was advertised hasn't shown up. It hasn't helped with employment. It's hurt in some cases, and so we ought to learn from these examples and common sense, and not adhere to one size fits all solutions when there's such variability within the disabilities world.
Thanks so much, David. I'd like to now open it up to some questions. There was one that was asked, David, that says, we talked about ICFs and concerns about quality. And so the question is, are there standards for ICFs that they have to meet in order to receive funding? And who oversees the quality of these types of facilities?
Yeah. Well, Scott, you're better equipped to answer this question than I am. But one thing I would say about it, because this came up a lot. I mean, one of the reasons that we were so, we actually contemplated buying a home and donating it to a program in our community and creating a group home for Lauren back when we were considering what her options were. And one of the things that we were concerned about was supervision and oversight. And in addition to the fact that she would not do well in that kind of a setting, I never have that concern at Misericordia. And the state has certain oversight responsibilities there. But we should point out that in this legislation that was working its way through Congress, there were quality control kinds of provisions built in for group homes. And what we argued vehemently was the very same provisions that apply to group homes should apply to ICFs, high standards of quality that should be enforced. I mean, I think Scott would say, we're very comfortable with that because Misericordia would meet all those standards. And every place that deals with people with disabilities should. There have been some horrific examples, as I said earlier, of larger settings. There have also been scandals. The Tribune reported on this some years ago in group homes, because and if you add as many as this legislation will permit, it creates an even greater oversight challenge for the states. So we should have high standards and they should apply across the board, and the funding of enforcement of those should be meaningful. And this should not just be language on a page, but the actual fact. But Scott, again, the partnership we have, just so all of you know, is that I talk and Scott thinks. And so he's always got a great handle on the essence of these things. So you may want to add to what I just said.
Well, I will add to it, but that's a total mischaracterization. I am by far the junior partner in this relationship, and gladly so. There are, detailed sets of regulations, both at the state level and the federal level, that ICFs, intermediate care facilities, need to meet. And CMS at the federal level and the state Department of Developmental Disabilities and public health at the state level supervise and inspect facilities on a regular basis. In fact, the regulations for ICFs are much stricter than they are for the group homes. And I would also point out that in Illinois, just a couple of years ago, there was a detailed quality study of group homes in Illinois across 17 metrics of quality. And the finding was that the group homes in Illinois failed to meet a single one of those 17 metrics. So there are quality issues at large facilities, there are quality issues at small facilities. And as David said, we support the imposition of quality standards and the enforcement of it. And we obviously want high quality for everybody receiving disability services. And it's an issue regardless of the kind of setting that we're talking about. Rabbi Cohen, Rabbi Heaps, any questions you want to ask of David, or anybody in the group you're with have any questions for David?
So thank you, Scott. So I think there's another question in the chat, or there are a couple of questions in the chat. And you have the ability to see them, right, Scott?
I do.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't think we have any questions yet here in the room.
Okay, let me read one here to you, David. See, do the staff shortages leave residential placements in jeopardy of keeping licenses because it does not comply with state ratios of staff to residents? Let me try to respond to that. What facilities have been doing to make sure they do continue to meet ratios? And there are ratios that apply to the ICFs. Typically in the group homes, there aren't staffing ratios, strict ratios, but they do need to supply enough staff to meet the needs of the folks working, living there. And so what places have done is a lot of times they'll have administrative folks fill in and take the staffing positions, which of course is not ideal. These are not folks that do this work on a daily basis, but they're doing it just to meet the emergency. There's temporary staffing agencies that get used. There are places that consolidate their homes, for example, close homes and move the folks from one home to another in order to provide staff. You know, all of this diminishes the quality of services, obviously, and is not a good solution, but it's what they're doing to meet this emergency.
Yeah, and I would just add that anything that exacerbates it is, that's why I said, you know, if you infuse group homes with money for hiring, which you should do, but you don't make a similar adjustment for ICFs, you create a competition in a very, very tight market for, you know, these direct care workers who are, by the way, heroic. I mean, the work that they do is just so important to our functioning. But you know, Misericordia is well positioned. They do a very good job on this, but generally speaking, because we're not just talking about Misericordia, there are a lot of places that are going to suffer if that disparity holds. And there are some that told us that they might have to shutter their doors because of this very question. So it's a great question.
And even at Misericordia, you know, they have actually a new home on the campus that could serve, I believe it's 8 or 12 individuals, particularly those with autism, that they have not opened because they don't have the staff to staff the home. The home is there, it's built, it's furnished, it's ready to go. The only thing holding it up is a lack of staff. And a result of that, there are a dozen folks who need services who are not getting them. That's a tragedy. And it really needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could, David, you made mention of the voice of the community not being as strong as it could be, that there were intramural, I think that was the word you used.
Yes.
Intramural issues. And can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, you know, I remember years ago, I was at I forget why, but I received an award from the ARC, which originally stood for Association of Retarded Citizens. That is not a fashionable name now, and that's not how they refer to themselves. But the organizing, one of their fundamental principles was no ICFs, Misericordia, evil. This was before Lauren lived there. And it was really, you know, the proselytizing was really intense. And to be honest with you, you know, the sense among people who run ICFs like Misericordia is in response, you know, quite aggressive too, because there is this battle over funding. And, you know, I told them then, I came back a few years later and I told them, you know, we have a larger battle, which is to see that disability services are adequately funded. we can scrap over a smaller pie and try and take a little larger slice for our programs, or we can grow the pie, which is what is deeply necessary. And but I don't think, we haven't really gotten there. And the fact is that ICFs are a relatively small part of the equation at this point, and will be smaller still if this bill becomes law. But it is a necessary part of the equation, and we need not to be warring with each other, but rather supporting each other, one voice, fighting for the resources that are necessary across programs for disabilities. And we ought to be encouraging more high quality options like Misericordia, so that people don't feel like their only choice is a group home, which is great for many, not for all.
Thank you.
David, I think we are out of time. And again, greatly appreciate your spending time with us and getting up early out your way.
Thank you. Let me just say, I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate all of you getting up slightly less early, but early nonetheless, to talk about this issue, because I understand that not everybody has someone close to them who is impacted by this issue. So the fact that you come is meaningful to me. And then thank you for my brother Scott here, who this has been a long and difficult and challenging battle. It's still going on, but one of the benefits that I did not realize I would derive from it is to get to know Scott and to work with him. And every person with disabilities, not just at Misericordia, but around the country, are better off because this man has devoted his prodigious talents to this battle. And I just really admire him. So it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, David. Again, working with you has just been really fabulous, and I hope we can continue on because the fight definitely continues.
We should stop this mutual admiration. They're going to tell us to get a room. So thank you so much. Thank you for the forum, and keep people with disabilities in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you to everyone. And just a reminder that we have continuing adult learning next week. We're going to be offering a course for the love of Judaism. That would be at 9:30 as well, both in person and via Zoom. There will be opportunities to continue the learning. And just a reminder that Friday evening is the Scott B. Crane Kabbalat Shabbat worship disabilities, a part of our Jewish Disabilities Awareness and Inclusion month activities. And we'll have a special speaker. Seth will be a part of our worship, both helping to translate the worship in ASL and speaking about his own experience. So we look forward to continuing our work together. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, David. And